Now, the other thing I want to talk about, and we need to talk about, is the movement from bread to wine. Okay? In the Bible, we start off with fruit for babies. We were babies. We didn't have any clothes on. That's because we were babies. We were not allowed to have a knife. Daddy, can I have a knife for Christmas? No, son. Well, I'm almost 9 years old. Well, I don't know then. Mom says, no, you will not have a knife for Christmas, even if you're 9 years old. Well, can I have a lighter? No, you may not play in the fire. Can I drive the car? No. Why not? Because you're not old enough. You don't earn the right to it. You haven't earned enough merits to be given the right to use a knife. No, that's not how it goes. You don't earn merits. You grow up and become mature. And Adam and Eve were in the garden, and there was all this free, simple food. And there were angels in there. We just open the Gerber can, you pull it off, pick the Gerber off, and unscrew it, and spoon it into Adam and Eve's mouth. That's the vision for the garden. Okay? They didn't feel naked any more than babies do. They don't want to be clothed. That's what it's for. But when you get old enough, okay, you will be given knife and fire. And knife and fire is wisdom, and the other word for wisdom is knowledge of good and evil. And God says, when you are ready for knowledge of good and evil, every tree shall be food for you. You will eat of this tree, and you will die. And then, of course, you'll come to life again. Just like Adam went into death sleep, and God tore him in half, and then he woke up, and hey, babe, things were more glorious than they had been before, because the woman is the glory of the man, right? After a while, you live in the garden, and you've had enough bananas, you've had enough passion fruit, you've had enough peaches. All right, so it was nice, but something's missing. There's a great tragedy that begins to come into your mind. What is the great tragedy of the garden? Anybody? No donut trees. No donut trees. Okay, to make donuts, you've got to have knife and fire, and that's at the border here. When you go to sleep, into death sleep, and wake up again after the Sabbath day is over, and now everything you've learned in the garden is gelled together in your head, and you have wisdom, you're ready to have knife and fire. Why? Because knife and fire are to kill things, and you have to have gone through death and resurrection first before you are given the right to go out and kill things. I'll just remind you that Solomon prayed for knowledge of good and evil. And God says, because he said, I'm too young. I'm not ready for knowledge of good and evil. And God says, because you've asked for wisdom and not for money, I'll give you money and wisdom. Okay. What's the first thing he does? Very first thing. Take the sword and cut that baby in half. It's a manipulation of the sword, a threat to put the people to death. And David said the first thing you need to do when you become king is what? Kill Ahab, deal with so-and-so, deal with so-and-so, kill them all. Okay? I have to have a new Canaanite sweep. Get rid of all these problem people. Not kill them all, not all of them, but all right. Abiathar the priest was just sent away to Anathoth so that he could give birth eventually to Jeremiah. So now we come to bread. Bread for priests. And we get the science of bread. And we learn how to cut the bread down and to beat the bread up. And then to put it in the fire. And it starts to rise. You beat it down. All this violence. And then it rises again. And you put it in the fire. And it bakes. And becomes a nice loaf of bread. With a nice smooth skin. Okay? Just like a human being. And we find in the Old Testament that bread is for priests. Leviticus 2. Bread is there for them, but they're not to drink wine. Wine, we find, takes a lot more skill than bread. Try to make wine. Chances are you'll make vinegar. It takes skill to make wine. A lot more skill than it does to make bread. And it takes a lot longer to make wine than it does to make bread. Bread is in a day. Wine is longer period of time. And we get wine after the flood, after Noah has been elevated through an ascension up to the top of the mountain, which is also an exodus from the old world to the new. If it's an exodus, it's an ascension. If it's an ascension, it's an exodus. Okay? That's what he's gone through, and God makes him a king, and he plants his own garden as if he were God, and he leaves his garden just like God did, and he comes back and he passes judgment just like God did. He is now elevated to be the first king, and he has wine. He can relax with wine because he has put down all his enemies, and now he can have some wine. In Esther, after 3 years, in the third year, third hour, third day, third month, third year, the great king sits down on his throne, having defeated all of his enemies. Now he has a 6-month World's Fair, and 1 week, everybody in the entire palace can come, everybody in the entire city can come to the palace and drink wine or whatever they want. What a generous king. It's after he has settled his enemies that he can sit down with some wine. There's only one serpent in his garden, and that's his bad wife. Well, it's another story. Wine is for kings. There's even more human work involved in wine. Wine is for kings. There is online at Biblical Horizons an essay by some guy named Myers, Jeffrey Myers, concerning wine, and he goes through the entire Bible with all the verses showing that wine has to do with kingship. To be given wine means you're a king. You are now in the new world. You have passed through the flood, what Matthew 24 calls the cataclysm, which is part of that first century events. Okay, and now you are in the world of wine. You have both donuts in the morning, well, that's alpha food, and you have wine at night. So in the Lord's Supper, we have bread and wine, unless we're Scottish. Scots are Calvinists. They're so hung up, so stoic. Wine will not make them relax. There's no shalom in wine for Scotsmen. They had to invent Scotch. So bread and Scotch. Scotch will have enough shalom and rest in it for Presbyterians. All right. Noah, he has the wine, and obviously he has bread. Melchizedek brings out the bread and wine to Abram, and that's all it is. Melchizedek honors Abram as the future king. You and your people will be the rulers of this land, and you will rule in my city, Jerusalem. How did David know that Jerusalem was supposed to be the capital? Because it had been Melchizedek's capital. Way back in the day, the great priest king. That's where the capital is supposed to be. So bread and wine. The present king, Noachic king, priest king, gives to Abram and says, you will be priestly, and you and your people will have the kingship over this place. And then we add to bread and wine when we get to Pharaoh. Pharaoh, this nice young Pharaoh who's come to the throne, and he is tired of the bread and wine that he's being served. You know, he needs some bread, wants some bread, and they bring him stale bread. So he throws the baker into prison where Joseph is in charge of the prison. Potiphar is the jailer. Potiphar knows a good man when he sees him. He puts Joseph in charge of the prison, as you know, gives him the corner office, the air conditioner, and sends out for curry and Chinese every day. And he's living okay in the prison, but he wants out. He can't leave. So the baker is in there, and then the king says, well, I guess maybe I can have some wine, but they keep bringing him vinegar, so he throws the cupbearer in prison. Now, there's more to it than that. The baker is the Secretary of Agriculture, and the cupbearer is the man who advises the king. Well, Joseph, of course, becomes the new baker. He's in charge of all the bread, and he's the one who has the silver cup with which he advises Pharaoh. So he becomes the advisor to the king. Bread and wine are food of kings. And now the Israelite people are supposed to serve the kings of the world the bread of life and the wine of death. The ability to die for other people is in this wine. And a king must be willing to die for others. Saul never was. David was. Judah is announced to be the king in the blessing of Jacob. Why? Because in Egypt, Judah said, let Benjamin go and kill me if you want. We're not going to do what we did to Joseph. Let Benjamin go. If you need to kill somebody, you will be the king then. So now we're adding to this bread and wine stuff. In Leviticus chapter 2, the bread, which is brought near to God, now we can bring bread. We have ascended up into God's presence by proxy on the back of one of these animals or carried by a bird. And now, in chapter 2, since essentially we have been turned into smoke in chapter 1, and Adam brings a near bringing. Now, a soul, nephesh, a soul, when he presents a grain offering, he presents tribute as a near bringing. His tribute shall be fine flour. Okay, that is including the salt of the covenant. Verse 13, every tribute, grain offering of yours, moreover, you shall season with salt, so that the salt of the covenant of your God shall not be lacking from your tribute. With all your near bringings you will offer salt. All right, the covenant is in the bread. That's not true anymore. This cup is the new covenant. The bread is a memorial now, but it's no longer the place where the covenant is lodged. And in verse 3, the remainder of the tribute, verse 2, he shall bring it to Aaron's sons, the palace servants, and shall take from its handful of fine flour and its oil with all of its frankincense, and the palace servants shall transform it into smoke with its memorial portion on the communion site, bridal food of a soothing aroma to the Lord. And this is repeated throughout the chapter, that each form of bread has part of it given to God as a memorial, to call on God to come near. Memorials are smoke that goes up to God, and God says, smells like a cream-filled, chocolate-covered donut. I like that. I'll come down. All right? Who else brings memorial bread to God, asking Him to come and judge? The woman who is suspected of adultery. All right? The jealousy ritual, the jealousy inspection. She comes before God, she has memorial bread in her hand. Then God is called to come near. The book of Malachi is all about this. Malachi 7 times refers to the Mincha. And the message of Malachi to the priests is, you priests, commit all these sins, and then on top of that, you bring tribute offering and ask me to come? You want me to come and save you from the Persians? Persians are not all that bad. So what's your problem? Oh, well, we want to have our own independent nation. We don't want to be part of the British Empire. We don't want to be, we got to have our own thing. All right, sure, fine, okay, if that's what you want. You won't like it. The Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to His temple, even the messenger of the covenant, and you're not going to like it. It's going to be like a refining fire. Okay, it's not going to be any fun. You're so stupid as to commit these sins and waft memorial bread before me and ask me to come. What does it say in the New Testament about this? For this reason, many are fallen asleep, many are sickly, and some have fallen asleep, because the Lord's Supper is an inspection of jealousy. Whole church can come under a trouble if the church is in evil states. Not just if there's one person who's committing sins out there, unless the elders refuse to deal with it, then judgment might come. Okay? And there are all kinds of other reasons why people can become sick or die. But the Bible tells us that this is one of the reasons. All right? God comes, we ask Him to come. Belshazzar's feast. There was no Belshazzar's feast. Daniel chapter 5 verse 1 says, Belshazzar the king gave a great bread for 1,000 of his lords. And in front of the 1,000 he was drinking the wine. When you read that as the opening verse, you think, uh-oh. Yeah, let's bring out all the different gods, including the lampstand from the temple, and praise all the gods. Would one of you gods please hear us? We've got bread, bread, bread. The only God who can hear heard, and He came, and He wrote on the wall out of His lampstand. You know how it goes from there. That's an inspection of jealousy. All right? Memorial bread. That's the old world. And it's still true today. The Lord's Supper is still memorial bread, but the covenant is no longer part of the bread. In Numbers 15, wine, which is the blood of grapes, according to Jacob, Jacob says that Judah, the future king, will enjoy the blood of grapes, that is wine. Wine, the blood of grapes, from the land of promise is brought near, but then is poured out. It's not shared in a meal with God. God doesn't say, okay, bring it on in to the temple. You priests who eat the bread in Leviticus chapter 2 can now have some of this memorial wine. No, not yet. Now, at a distance, if you want to come to the Feast of Tabernacles, you can convert your money into wine or strong drink, whatever your heart desires, and make merry before the Lord. But that's way on out here. That's not inside the palace right next to the throne of God or near the throne of God. It's not where the table of showbread is. The showbread table has beer on it. Grain juice made from grains. Kvass. Beer. Doesn't have wine. Wine does not come in. Not then. Now when we come to Jesus, the ritual that He instituted is 2 memorials. There are 2 prayers. And this uplifting of prayer, thanksgiving, not some type of consecration, not ask the Holy Spirit to come down on it, none of that. It's just thanks. Thanks for the bread. Okay? And then we eat it into ourselves. Now, in case you don't know this, the altar, stone altars are like this, and you kill the animal and you put it on here and the fire goes up. The altar in the tabernacle is hollow. Okay? In the middle is a rack. You've got your horns here. Flames of fire, mountain peaks, since this is a stylized holy mountain. and the food is put inside here where the fire is. The altar eats the food, and then smoke goes up, so God smells it. Now, between today and tomorrow, I want each one of you to eat 12 cloves of garlic, and do not shower in the morning. And then you will smell. Okay? And you'll smell pretty good. At least some of us think so. All right, like garlic. You eat Jesus, you smell like Jesus. That's this sweet aroma that the Bible talks about. It's real. What you eat, you smell like. And if all of us eat the same bread, we all start to smell the same. Yes, that's real. Okay? Now the covenant is in the wine, not in the bread. We've said that about already. Okay, the supper gives us God above and God within. So we take the bread into ourselves, and God within sees that, and that is making memorial before Him. Now, this gift, is it substance or history? And the church is focused on substance, is focused on the change of elements, is focused on how the bread changes. You have and yet the wine is the more important part, because the wine is the gift of the new creation that makes us kings and enables us to die for others. People in the Old Testament, Old Covenant times, could not really die for others. And you don't find God saying in the law, die for others, die for others, die for others, be martyrs. Because you haven't drunk the blood of Jesus Christ. Until Jesus comes and dies, we're not able to. But now that we're in union with Him, we have the privilege of dying for others. You take the cup, look to the person next to you and say, I volunteer to die for you. Or not. But you are. Now, if we notice the rite, we will see how impossible the theology is. This is how I would like for you all from now on to serve bread in your church. But Jesus, on the night in which He was betrayed, took bread, and when He had given thanks, He broke it. Now, what we don't know is whether that means He broke it in half or broke off His piece and broke it. Notice the blood coming out? We'll have some of that in a minute. And He gave it to them, saying, take and eat. This is my body given for you. Do this for my memorial. It was already out of my hands when I said those words. He was probably already munching on it. Now, if you did that, you would never have any questions about the status of this bread. On the other hand, if you say those words and you put it back on the table, now you got to think about it. What's the status of it? And you have a whole theology develop out of it. I hope this is good bread. I can't eat it yet because I got to keep talking. The rite Jesus instituted changes everything. Plus, you all are going to be knit into one loaf before you have any wine. You will all become one body from one loaf. Then you will have the opportunity to die for one another. Now there's some reason for that. We complete the old before we move to the new. Intention is impossible. All right. So once we begin to see the rite itself, and we've talked about this before, what's being given to us is all of history from Alpha to Omega. From the bread, which is the first thing we can make when we get out of the garden, as we have a contribution to make, is God man. From toast in the morning to scotch at night, from priest to king, from infancy to old age, from Alpha to Omega, from beginning to end, the entirety is given to us in this rite. So, that concludes the remarks I wanted to make, but notice again the simplicity. There's nothing a bunch of complex about this. Okay? It's just perfectly fine to have prayers beforehand, such as we'll be discussing. But when it comes to the actual serving of the Lord's Supper, you need to have a prayer for the bread. Thank you for the bread. Maybe a few other words. Thank you for the wine. But one and then the other. And that progression is meaningful. If you serve them at the same time, or if you serve them in little groups, or if you allow in tincture, if you're not sitting down and passing it hand to hand, if you're not one anothering one another in the body, you got a problem.